It's so quiet.
How did that happen?
Oh,
All right. Do I start this off or do you guys start this off?
1, 2, 3, 4. We do currently have 4 members present. You can go ahead and start, Jenny. We have a quorum.
Okay. Well, good evening, you guys. Monday night, July 26, 2021. We're in our Environmental Justice Committee meeting. And anybody there out in Zoom, if you want to speak, you'll just raise your hand and the clerk will allow you to make a comment, public comment. And I'm sorry, my voice is really bad tonight. So do I need to say anything more, Mary Beth, or can we go into roll call?
I think you can go right into roll call.
Do we want to do pledge allegiance?
Oh, yes, I do. It's there. Okay, let's
Thank
do the
you,
pledge
Carol.
allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, now Carol.
Okay, Jennifer Knisley,
Here.
Bonnie London,
Here.
Stephanie Youngblood.
Here.
I do not see AJ. I do not see Lorraine. I do not see Sharon. David Ring.
Here.
I do not see Georgia Ann. Carolyn McCullough.
Here.
Okay.
Thank you. So now this is time for committee comments for any items not on the agenda.
Just something real quick, if I can.
Yes.
I think I think the microphone is on somewhere because I was getting some feedback. I guess it's not here anymore, but earlier was the mic on at the? I wonder if it was on at the depot.
Yes, it was. When I live streamed the YouTube, it started doing that. So I disabled that
Got it.
volume.
Okay. Yeah, I don't hear it anymore, but okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other committee members have a comment for items not on the agenda? Okay, I do not see any. So any public comment for items not on the agenda?
Madam Chair, we have one phone-in listener. So if that person would like to speak, you can raise your hand by entering *9 to raise your hand, and I can open the mic for you to talk. Seeing none.
All right, so now we will need a motion to adopt the agenda.
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
And roll call?
Okay. Jennifer Knisley,
Yes.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Yes.
and Stephanie, David Ring.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now any public comment on the consent agenda?
Again, to our phone-in caller, *9 to raise your hand. Seeing none.
Okay. And now we need a motion to approve the minutes from the April 19th, 2021 meeting.
I move to adopt the consent agenda.
Oh, I think we're past that. We're on the minutes.
Isn't that the same thing?
No, it's consent agenda.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, minutes are on the consent agenda.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm getting my nonprofits mixed up.
I was like, wait a minute, did I screw up already?
No, you did good, David. We got a motion. We need a second.
I second.
And then roll call?
Okay, Jennifer Knisley,
Yes.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Yes.
and David Ring.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.
All right, and now we will go to committee matters, and I will turn that over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to welcome once again Christy Consolini. She is your technical staff on the Environmental Justice Committee. So take it away, Christy.
Okay, let me share my screen. Can you see that PowerPoint? Yes. Okay.
And can you make it big,
Yes.
please?
See if I can move that over. Okay, and then, oops.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, I'm gonna move it that way because your faces are covering it up. Can you still see it okay?
Yes.
Okay. So first off, we are going to just, oh, it's going to do this on me. Okay. I need to see a little portion of it. Okay. So we're going to start by just going through a recap of the April meeting and then go into the draft goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures. So the April meeting, we did an overview of what environmental justice is. And we discussed the data that Cal EPA has put together to rank Loomis as a town. And that ranking shows Loomis as not being a disadvantaged community. Loomis ranks very low on the scale and is doing great. So it's good news that Loomis is doing a great job of meeting environmental justice throughout the community. Our approach to this element is basically developing a basic goal, objective, policy, and implementation measures, and then referencing the relevant policies and implementation measures from the other elements, where those topics might be more detailed, and referencing them will reduce redundancy, and then it also eliminates potential for inconsistency, so that there isn't a policy that says one thing in environmental justice and another thing, say, in circulation. So we also went through the draft goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures. There's only one goal, one objective, one policy, and a couple of implementation measures. And then we were all assigned some homework to review materials. So here we have comments that were received from the public and from committee members. I'm just going to summarize these for you. So one comment was, why is the 2018 unemployment factor so high? And I had to do a little digging for this, but what I found was interesting, and that the version 3.0 ranking uses years 2010 to 2015 for their unemployment rate, which is picking up some of the recession numbers. So that's why that number was kind of on the high side. Looking at the 4.0 version of the rankings, that high percentage goes away. So as the years progress, they get a little more current on their data that they're using. And then another question was, since this overlaps with every other chapter, how do we address this? And our approach, as I just went over, is kind of a holistic approach where we're looking at all of these issues in their respective elements. Then we come back and we reference them in the environmental justice element and create a couple extras that really touch specifically on environmental justice that perhaps are not addressed in some of the other elements. Another question we received was, this doesn't seem to touch on the cultural aspects of Loomis. And when we're looking at disadvantaged communities, we're really not looking at, say, the past of Loomis. We're looking at the here and now. So there was a request to acknowledge the Asian and Native American communities in the town's past. And we do that in the cultural and historical resources section of the conservation of resources element. It's not something that we look at here except for what our current demographics are. So we can reflect back on that in the cultural resources policies, but it's not something that we would necessarily look at for environmental justice in terms of past history. Another comment was to address solid waste buildup. That's important, and I think we've got some policies in the public services and facilities element to address solid waste and what we're doing with that in the town of Loomis. Another item related to that is that the rankings look at solid waste, and we have the old county landfill within the boundary of sort of the area, which it doesn't meet town limits. It goes beyond that. So it's not a huge ranking on there. So I think Loomis is doing well in terms of that. And then again, we're addressing that through the public services element. Another question is the Loomis Library Director is organizing events to remember the 80th anniversary of Japanese internment that affected the community. That's great. I think it shows that Loomis is really reaching out to the community and reflecting upon its past and the diverse history of Loomis. That sort of detail is very detailed. It's not necessarily a general plan level detail, but it shows that Loomis is doing great things to bring the community together. Another comment was that there has been an increase in the percent of students at Loomis Grammar School and H. Clark Power School that receive lunch assistance. That's something to keep in mind as we move forward. The economic data isn't showing currently in terms of environmental justice that there is a huge discrepancy in income, but as you know, in the future, that's something to keep in mind as the economy changes, perhaps. Are there safe routes to the schools? We don't have those safe routes in place yet. That's been something that's been talked about between many of the different committees. I know we touch upon it in public services, we talk about it in circulation, and we talk about it in the safety element. Another comment that was received indicated that instead of 5 acres of parks per 1,000 persons, we should focus on where the parks are located. And this is really a comment for the Parks and Recreation Committee. And they had settled on a 5 acre per 1,000 person ratio, and also on focusing parks centrally in town. So those are things that the other committee has established, and we can reference that in the environmental justice element. There is some concern over gentrification and displacement in the downtown area. And that's something that we talk about in the economic development element. There's a whole section for the downtown area. Another comment is the setting should highlight the Cal EPA ranking topics over 50%. If you look at the revised setting, you'll see that there is some text added in underline to discuss that. So there's a couple of areas where the town ranks over 50%. And the 3.0 version of those rankings had, I think, 5 areas, and the new version, the 4.0, has 3 areas. So one of those areas that is still high is ozone. That's a regional issue. Loomis can address that to some degree through transit programs and other programs to reduce ozone output. So we cover that in the air quality section of the conservation of resources element. Another place was traffic levels. It's been reduced in the new version below 40%. So it shows that there's been some improvements there already. And before I go any farther, the difference between the 4.0 and the 3.0 version is new data, but also there was a sort of a calculation issue going on with how their formula was working, and they fixed that in the 4.0 version. So the numbers changed a little bit in some of the areas. Another area is cleanup sites and groundwater threats. We talked about that a bit, where there are some parts of town where there might have been an old cleanup site. There might have been a leaking underground storage tank, orchards, old mining sites. Those are things that contribute to that. And the proximity of housing to those sites is what bumps that number up. Even if they're cleaned up, it becomes a proximity to housing kind of an issue. Solid waste is on that list, and that's because of the old county dump site. It's only at 52% of that risk area, so it's just on the cusp. And then unemployment, which I talked about earlier, that's actually gone down to like a 40% level. So using the new data, they were able to reduce that number down to like a 30 to 40% area. And housing burden also reduced down to a 30%. So that's been added to the setting. We'll go through that in just a minute. What can we do to stop Rocklin affecting Loomis, since portions of Rocklin are in our Cal EPA map area? The answer to that comment is you really can't do a whole lot in terms of changing Cal EPA's method. They use the Census Bureau census tract data, which doesn't exactly follow town boundary lines. So you're going out towards Folsom Auburn Road, so you're getting sort of over to that Granite Bay area. You've got a small section of Rocklin on the south, and then you've got county areas to the north. What you can do is to just, encourage good planning. So when our neighbors have projects that are, near the borders of Loomis, reviewing those projects, commenting on them, those are things that you can do to make sure that everybody is using good planning and being equitable. Another comment was schools should not count as accessible parks. The town is still going to continue to work with the schools to provide access to those facilities. And I think it's a good resources for all persons, especially when schools are located throughout different parts of town. Does this topic address minority-owned businesses? And it can. It's something that I would think the economic development element would have a better grasp of addressing. And I think it's important to note that most of Loomis, over 80% of the population is white. So you have a small percentage of minorities. And so I think when you're trying to promote business, it's a good idea to promote business, maybe not focus quite so much on whether it's a minority-owned business or not. We can add stuff in if that's something you're interested in. But I think it's good for Loomis to have a robust economy across the board. Loomis has been growing in diversity recently, and that's true. If you look at the demographics between the 3.0 version and the 4.0 version, you'll see that it's slightly smaller percentage of a white population and increasing numbers of different minority groups, which is great. The setting should add more detail on the environmental justice requirements in a general plan. If you look at both the element introduction and the setting, I've added some information about the policies surrounding environmental justice. It's a little more robust in terms of what the requirements are for a general plan. So there was some requests to add goals regarding the siting of industrial uses in relation to schools and residences, and expanding transit service. Siting of industrial uses in relation to sensitive receptors is something that we would do through the land use element. So we could add a goal, but I think the land use element will cover that by citing uses in the town, so that there's a buffer between industrial and residential for future use. And then on the transit, we have quite a robust number of policies related to transit and improving transit service in Loomis. So we can reference that as well from the circulation element. There was a request to provide an appendix on the EnviroScreen sites located outside the town limit, but within the census block that affect the town's rating. I have not done this. I have the data, but the data changes frequently. If you want an appendix, if the committee decides that that's something you really want, I can prepare that. But the data will change fast. And I had a project a few months ago where there was a listed site, and within 3 months, the data had changed. So it goes quickly. But if that's something you want, please let me know and I can put an appendix together. The town should assist private landowners in cleaning their sites to prevent a poor rating in the future. It's something to consider, but it's expensive and the town will be losing money quickly if they are providing lots of assistance for that. It also doesn't encourage landowners to clean the sites or dispose of their materials in the proper way necessarily if they may feel that the town is picking up the bill for that. The Department of Toxic Substances Control has to review all these reports and sign off on them, and they are not cheap. So it can cost quite a bit of money. It's something, I mean, maybe if we have some good language in there, if you want to add that, that's something we can consider, but please be aware that it's costly. And then finally, there was a request to add implementation measures to consider community amenities. So community garden for food access, community laundry to avoid pollution of waterways, community cold storage to combat food loss during power outages, and community cooling centers or products to combat extreme heat events. I have added an implementation measure for the town to continue working with the county, who provides some of these resources, such as the cooling center. I believe the Vets Hall is used on occasion for a cooling center. A community garden would be something that perhaps in a capital improvement program would be part of a park. Loomis has quite large lots, so I think a lot of the residents are able to provide for themselves in their own properties, but it's a great park amenity. I have one right around the corner from my house, and it's well used and it's nice. Community laundry, I didn't get into that level of detail. That's something that usually service programs or churches, different organizations will perhaps give a voucher for that kind of service for homeless persons. I believe that the homeless survey only found that there is one homeless person on average at any given time in Loomis. So I don't see a huge need for community laundry. That would be an expense on the town for not a whole lot of use. But in the future, that's something to keep in mind if conditions change. And then on the cold storage, it's an interesting idea. It's a fun idea, but I know from previous power outages that the town goes down. So it's not just your house that's down, but Mary Beth can't continue typing away on her computer when the power is out. So cold storage for the whole community it would require a lot of generators. And I don't know if that's something the town has. So I did put in an implementation measure that's a little broader to address the needs of the community based on the situations at hand. Is there a question?
Bonnie.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going back to the community garden. Talk with the library director because they're actually partnering with the UC Master Gardeners and they will have an active learning garden and I believe a community garden.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Good. That's really good. And that's a great way to go about providing that service. I know the one around the corner from me has a lot of lots and you rent them for, I don't know, like $80 a year or something like that. So moving on, we'll go on to a discussion of the draft goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures. So our approach is to provide a general goal, objective, policy, and implementation measure for environmental justice, reference the goals from the other elements or the policies and implementation measures from other elements. For example, these are policies related to clean water, air quality, noise management, transit, access to parks and open space. And then referencing those other elements helps to avoid redundancy and conflicting statements. Some of the other, oh, I see a question. Lorraine, do you have a question?
Lorraine, you may unmute.
Here we are. I'm sorry. Took a minute to unmute. Thank you. I was interested that none of those address waste management, which I think currently is one of the big issues for environmental justice, and both in how and where they're situated. But also, I know that in many communities, the issue of people who are on sewage versus septic is a major issue in terms of poverty and indications of environmental justice. It doesn't look to me like we're addressing that in any way. And I actually have no conception of how many people in Loomis are currently on septics, how they're, they're very expensive.
Yeah, and it's something that the county environmental health decides if you can have septic or not. You have to meet some thresholds for that to be feasible. So lot size, different conditions on your site in terms of soils and things like that. We talk about septic and sewage in the public services and facilities element. So referencing that there, we've done that for the environmental justice element, but if there's something in addition that you want to see, we can consider that for sure.
Is there a long-term goal in the other committees as to pulling more people on away from septics, or?
I'd have to look at our particular language, but we do have requirements that if you're within proximity to an existing sewer line, then you need to be connecting to that.
But there's no plan within Loomis right now to increase the sewer lines to any new areas.
Real quickly, that's up to the utility district. That's not a town function. And
Right.
so it's up to SPMUD to either expand and under the regulations of the state of California, they're required to service the community as soon as they can. But the town has nothing to do with the extension of the sewer.
Thank you. What agency is that? I'm sorry.
South Paso Municipal Utility District.
Thank you.
Their current requirement is if you're within 600 feet, you have to connect. And then the town zoning code requires you to connect if your lot size is 2.3 acres or less. And Carol, correct me on that if I'm wrong.
I believe
You know what?
that's
No,
correct.
you're actually correct on that. And the same as what Anders just said is that the sewer lines and the sewer system is dictated by SPMUD and where they actively have lines. I know in the future, that's what they would like to do is expand it, but there are vast areas in the entire Placer County area, these large lots and stuff like that, that they just do not have sewer lines to. Placer County Environmental Health is really they're really easy to work with. They set the directives really well and that kind of stuff. We have put into place our own measures as well as anything possible with SPMUD to require. We also at the town level require that new commercial businesses are hooked to sewer. Even if, say presently the land itself is not served, a new commercial business cannot start or retain occupancy until sewer is obtained, which for some businesses, it's a very, very costly expense to bring a very distant sewer line over to their building. So while the notion of having it is really a great idea, it's just for many, many of our rural areas, it's not feasible. And for many of us that want to keep our rural area rural, it's going to probably stay that way for quite a while.
Is it true that no lot less than 2.3 can have a septic? It has to be connected to the sewer, even if it's far away? I wasn't clear on that.
If it's legal, if it's already in place, we do not require that somebody who's legal non-conforming, that they have to leave their house and not occupy their home because they have a present sewer. That would be a very nominal set of things. But where that comes into play with us, Lorraine, is if somebody comes in for a lot split on one of our rural lots,
Okay.
they're not going to be allowed to split it smaller than 2.3 acres unless they have obtained sewer for it.
I have a hand up from our lawyer.
Yes.
Okay,
under
I just
this.
have a quick note on the kind of lack of our control over expanding sewers. So I just looked on the South Platte Municipal Utility District website, and it looks like their overarching planning, the way that we're doing the general planning, is called the strategic plan, and that's something they do every 5 years. So if expansion of sewer in Loomis is something that the committee's really interested in or individual members are interested in, I encourage people to look on the district's website and get involved in that process to kind of further that objective, since the municipal utility district is the one that's in charge of that.
And just a little bit of history. The town of Loomis, SPMUD ran out of sewer capacity for the town, and the town put a substantial amount of pressure on them to build the alternative sewer line through Turtle Island to bring capacity up where they could connect. And so the town has had an influence with the utility district, but doesn't have direct control.
Great, thank you. Lorraine, do you have any other questions?
I'm actually curious in terms of environmental justice, to what extent people who are unable to comply with the sewer requirements lose rights to their property. And is this an issue in this community? I know it is in some areas. That failure to, connect to a sewer line or have adequate sewage can lead to losing your property. Is that ever an issue here?
I don't believe that people would have their rights taken away. You can still, that's the purpose of having, allowing some of the septic where it's feasible, so that it's a lower cost alternative to connecting to the sewer where there is no sewer service, perhaps.
In the 14 years that I've been doing it, Lorraine, nobody per se has lost their property or their property rights.
Okay.
The thing with Loomis is, even though as a town, we're pretty young, these properties have been in existence for so many years as Placer County, and we have septic systems and septic permits that date back into the 1940s. So every lot in the town of Loomis has access to a sewage system option, whether or not it is sewer or septic. And anybody who's owned their property for a long time, they already have their septic stuff in place. We have some vacant lots that have nothing brought to it yet, but all these landowners know that in order to develop, if you want to build a house, you're going to have to have sewage of some type.
Right.
And so they know that they're either going to have to go septic and well, or they're going to have to go septic and city water, where if that is a more, an option that's available. So the most basic answer to your question is that, to my knowledge, nobody has, well, first off, nobody's lost the rights to their property based on their ability to have sewage. That's not to say that somebody who's inherited this property from their great grandmother twice removed, they may not be in a position to develop at this point in time, but they've not lost the right to the property. They just they just haven't lost the rights to their property. They just are not able to develop a residential type of dwelling if you don't have sewage available.
Right. I guess my concern was when we moved onto our property, the sewage system the septic was so old.
Right,
was
you probably had to
completely
update it.
compliant, and it was actually contaminating a large portion.
Right.
And surprise, I don't know to what extent that impacts water quality and riparian systems, and how, when there's just not that much follow-up in terms of how are these systems actually working.
Right. And, there's not going to be follow-up unless somebody comes to take a look at that property or somebody's trying to develop that property. But, just as you guys did, I mean, you looked into it, you took care of what you needed to do. Sometimes these old systems, they have to be updated, or you have a system that's a 2-bedroom system and it's not going to fit your 4-bedroom house.
Right. Okay, thank you. I'm just.
Good question, though.
Okay, back to our slides. If no one else has a comment, are we good to go? Okay. So this slide just shows goals, objectives, policies, and implementation measures and how one feeds into the next. So goals are your direction setters. They're broad and they reflect a community value or idea. The objectives get more specific to those goals. They're kind of the intermediate step between the goal and the policy. The policy indicates a commitment to a certain course of action or how the town should address a decision. And then the implementation measures are those techniques that carry out those policies. So they're the most detailed. These are the draft goals, objectives, and policies. I'm going to skip over the slide because we're going to go straight into the element in just a minute. So questions to consider when reviewing policies and other elements. What I want to do is if you had a chance to review the draft element that was sent out, hopefully you all did. And what I want to do is to hopefully you've read through them and you've been able to recognize where there might be a gap, perhaps. So is there a policy in the element to address the equitable distribution of benefits and environmental burdens? Is there a policy that should be included on a particular topic in relation to environmental justice that's not necessarily addressed in that element policy? And then should a policy be strengthened to integrate themes of health, resilience, equity, and environmental justice? So should the environmental justice specific policies be strengthened? Just those are some things to keep in mind. What I do not want this committee to do is to look at them, the other elements, policies, or implementation measures, and attempt to redraft that text. Those committees have spent a lot of time putting those policies and implementation measures together and have settled on texts that they would like to put forward and forward to the Planning Commission for their review. So I don't want to go changing those, but I do want us to look at them and see if there's something that we need to add to the environmental justice element on that particular topic. So our next steps, these are just the documents that you should already have access to. Then I'm going to stop sharing this and I'm going to open up the setting just to show you those changes real quick.
But Christy, people will have an opportunity to talk about those comments at the level of the planning commission and even when it goes to
Absolutely.
council. So it's not that they can't be changed if they have that. It's just at this point, we're not rewriting a committee's recommendation.
Right, right. And please, I encourage you, if you see an error, if you see something that you want to have added, those are things that can be brought forth and the planning commission can then consider them. But tonight I don't want to go changing the text of those other elements. So hang on, I've almost got it open. Okay, are you seeing something that says environmental justice at the top?
Yes.
Okay. And I can make that bigger. Oops, that's too big. Okay. So you've seen all this before, except for the underlined portion. So we did receive a comment, which was really, really good idea, to add a little more detail about the history of environmental justice and how OPR is tasked with overseeing that through the general plan. So I've just added, basically, this is all quoted here. So just adding some detail as to this text. Do you want me to read it out and comment, or are you okay with us just skipping through that part?
That would be up to the committee here. I don't think we need to read it.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So the one that you're showing and the one that was just recently, so there's another version that has all of the, maybe not. I have two versions. Yeah. So the one that you're showing, the one that there's another version that has all the goals and implementation measures in it. Those are two separate documents.
Yes, this is the setting. So this is volume 3 setting.
So in both of them,
yes,
you have this whole thing that you just underlined.
Yes.
Is that necessary?
The underline is just to show you what was added from the previous version.
But I mean, so I get that. But I mean, in both documents, you've listed those four.
Right.
It seems like you've added everything that you've underlined right there to both documents.
Yes, I did. And it's just as an introduction to that element, just to give some background to the reader as to what's required in case they're not looking at the setting.
Okay. So that was that. I was confused as to whether they were two separate ones, because all of that stuff that you added both. And I was like, is this so? And then you didn't have all the data in the other one. So it's okay. Right. So you meant to put all of them in both of them.
Yes, if the committee feels that you don't want it in the element, you'd rather have it in the setting, that's fine. Just give me the direction and I will make the change.
Are we going to go over that document separately later, or
we'll do that next?
Okay. Got it. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to read this. If you have not, please do. You can always send me a comment if you find a typo or anything like that. Basically, this is just going over defining the rules from the state and how OPR has put them forward in the guidelines for general plan documents. It also talks about the environmental screening tool that's used it's generated by Cali, PA. So these are just some background information on that.
Christy, a question in the chat.
Yes.
Does Loomis have any identified disadvantaged communities?
No, not at all. Loomis, I'll get down to the table in just a second, but as you'll see, Loomis ranks extraordinarily low. It's really low, which is great. It's showing you that Loomis is doing a really good job as a community, making sure that there's equal access, that people have the opportunity to be heard like we're doing tonight. Those are all parts of the environmental justice requirement. So Loomis is doing great. I did add the 4.0 data. It's still in a draft. I don't expect to see anything change. But I did want to include that because they had fixed, again, they had fixed a anomaly in some of their formulas, and it caused the numbers to change. So while our percentile for Loomis it's at 13%, it went down for the Loomis north of I-80 area, which used to be 15 to 20%. And then it went slightly higher for the area south of I-80. So at 16% versus 5 to 10%. But again, really low numbers, which is good. It's really good. The only thing that was added for the 4.0 is lead from housing. So that data is not available for the 3.0 version. The 4.0 version shows, again, really low percents. So that's good. And then I added a note because there was a lot of worry that the boundary line that they use based on the census tracts include areas outside of the town limits. So I know that there was a lot of concern over that. You know, we have a little bit of Rocklin, we have a little bit of the county. It's not just Loomis, but I think looking at the numbers, you're in great shape. But I did add that note so that it's clear that it includes a little bit of areas that aren't exactly Loomis. And then there was the comment that we should highlight areas where the factor is above 50%. David, did you have a question?
Oh, I did. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to interrupt or.
Yeah, it's fine.
So is the final draft going to have both the 3 and the 4 versions in it, or is it just going to have just the 4 in it? The table.
Depending on when they complete their or finalize their numbers, I'll get rid of the 3 if it's finalized before we adopt. I expect it to be, so when that happens, I'll just remove that whole section of the column.
And then when it's finalized, obviously table XX will have a number.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's in the setting and this didn't exist before. It's not updating. This is all brand new, and a brand new section of the setting. We don't quite have the number or its final location down. So there's a few gaps in terms of the numbering system.
And I had one other question.
Sure.
It was something you mentioned in your presentation. It was about gentrification, and I was wondering if that is is that an environmental justice issue?
It's not. If you look at the chart here, this is what they rank you on. So they're looking at pollution exposure. So everything from your air quality.
It's an economic issue. I totally agree with that, but
right.
It doesn't seem like it belongs probably somewhere in a general plan, but I would not say, in my opinion, it doesn't belong in the environmental justice plan. But I'm trying. Is that your opinion as well?
I think it's more of an economic development and a land use issue. So yeah, if you look at we're looking at environmental hazards, environmental pollutants. We're looking at health issues. And then socioeconomic factors, but not necessarily getting down to land use choices in terms of economic gentrification or things like that. So there is some socioeconomic factor put in there, but gentrification itself, they're not looking at specific neighborhoods. So the factors that exceeded the 50%, I touched on these earlier in the PowerPoint. So we have ozone, which is a regional wide issue. It's not going to go away just based on something that Loomis alone does. It's something that's going to happen on a regional basis. Cleanup sites, that include sites that have been cleaned and cleanup cases closed. That's an issue. So areas like Montserrat, you have houses on a site where you've had cleanup, but because there are houses on the site in that close proximity, that's what bumps up that number. If you had a site and there was nothing around it, your number wouldn't be quite as affected. So it's really based on proximity of sensitive receptors to those cleanup sites. And then it also relates to groundwater threats, which would be from underground storage tanks. So if you have maybe old gas stations, you have orchards where pesticides are just dumped onto the ground. Those are things that happened in Loomis's past that kind of make that ranking go up a little bit. Solid waste, it includes the closed dump site that's outside of the town limit, but within the census tract area. So that's looking at how that solid waste affects health. David, do you have another question?
So I think Carolyn made a comment about that this would be better if it was bulleted.
Okay.
And I think that's a great idea. And the other thing is with when you had mentioned it earlier, and then you're mentioning it again, the underground storage tanks, and they have to be a certain distance away from developments. And so because you had mentioned that our percentage ranking is so low that it's not something we have to worry about right now. I'm assuming that is the type of thing, if there was a development to come forward, that would show up in the EIR of that development's new project. And so it's not something that the town necessarily has to keep track of all on its own, because it's going to show up again later on, right? Is that right? Okay.
Right. So when new projects are brought forward and you have an EIR, you're reviewing them, that's when you want to look at and make sure that they have appropriate mitigation measures in place. And it's not going to be something where this number changes dramatically from year to year, unless there were some large disaster that were.
Does the town have to keep track of all of those locations, or is there another entity that does it, or does that show up in?
Department of Toxic Substances Control has their whole EnviroStore database, so they're keeping track of everything, and sites that are active, sites that are closed, all that stuff is on their website. Anyone can go look at it.
So our responsibility essentially as a town is to just make sure that the developer that comes in goes to that site and okay.
They'll know because it'll be tied to their land when they purchase that property. Okay. So DTSC will be knocking on their door saying, where's our program to clean this up?
Thank you.
So the town doesn't need to be keeping track of those because there are state agencies that are doing that. So the unemployment was another one. It's decreased well below 50% for this last, this 4.0. So and I would think it'll continue to decrease based on how old they use their data. So again, I think that should stay pretty steady. It's lower for 4.0, and I think that should be steady for a little bit. And then the housing burden under the 3.0 version for the area north of I-80 was high, but that's also gone down for the 4.0 version. So that addresses that. And then this is that map. So this was in the previous version. It just shows, here's Loomis, and here's the nearest disadvantaged community, which is down in Sacramento County. So if you look at this area and you even look at the neighbors, where the census tract is, you don't see a heavy case for a disadvantaged community to pop up or affect Loomis in any way.
Are there any disadvantaged communities? I mean, that map puts Loomis kind of at the top of the map. Is there anything up towards Penryn and Auburn? You
have to go up past Auburn.
Okay.
So nothing in Penryn. You've got to go a little ways up, farther up.
Is there any way that
I can modify the map.
It kind of looks like you're I see that you're just trying to get the other one there, but the way that you put the map, it kind of looks like you're saying, yeah, look, there's nothing here, but it could be literally, Lincoln is just north of it. I mean, Penryn, I guess. So if
I zoom out, it gets really small. And this was the closest one I could get to show.
Yeah, I'm not sure
where a disadvantaged community was.
Yeah. I'm not sure that the map actually helps. I mean, if you just say the nearest one is 20 miles away or 10 miles away in Sacramento.
Yeah. So I can, let me check that map again.
I don't know. Does anybody else have anything to say about that? It just, to me, it just kind of looks like it's just a little, it just kind of looks odd. Like if I were to see this in a scientific journal, I'd be like, I don't
What's
buy
right
any
here?
of this. Yeah. What's just north of Newcastle? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll look into that, and then I will stop sharing that, and I will bring up the element.
So are we supposed to stay within the hour time frame, or are we allowed to go over, or
We have 2 hours.
Okay.
2 hours.
All right.
So let me screen share this. Okay, can you see
Yes,
something that says 9, environmental justice?
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that easy for everyone to see?
Yes.
Okay. So again, the underlined is what I've added since the last time. This is that same text that was in the setting. Just gives a background as to why it's included, what the state is requiring. Because Loomis is so low, it is not a required element for the town of Loomis. If the percentages were much higher, then it would be a required element, but it's not. We are including it just so that we are showing we're compliant and that it matters to us, right? It's an issue that, we want to have a robust community and an equitable community. So that's why we have this here. So I added a little language that jurisdictions that do not encompass a disadvantaged community are not required to include an environmental justice element or adhere to the guidelines regarding environmental justice element contents as established in OPR's general plan guidelines. I added that just so that it's clear that it is not a requirement for Loomis at this time. That's all the old text from the introduction. And then we had already gone through the goals, objectives, and policies, but we have just a handful of them. So I'm going to go through them. The first goal is the goal of the Loomis General Plan environmental justice element is to support a thriving community by reducing health and environmental impacts, particularly on disadvantaged or low income communities within the town. Is everyone still on board for that goal? Okay, moving on to the objective. The provision of a full range of access to housing, public facilities, and economic centers, improvement in the quality of the built and natural environment, and promotion of civil engagement. These are what the environmental justice element should be addressing in terms of this topic. Bonnie, I see you have your hand raised.
Is that civil or civic engagement? Or do we want both civil engagement?
Yeah,
You do want it to be civil, but I think that's probably civic.
Civic.
Yeah.
There we go.
Good catch.
Yes, thank you. We do want to be civil, though. It's always good to be civil as well as have civic engagement. Thank you. The next policy is consider environmental justice issues as they pertain to the equitable provision of public services, access, housing, amenities, and environmental quality. And the word access was added to that.
You're just looking for anybody to pop in after each one of these.
Absolutely.
Okay. And that's for the members in the public too.
Yes.
What are you trying to say when you say access there? What is that? What access to what?
So it's access to parks and access to food, access to transit and other amenities that would be available in a community so that it's not just a certain neighborhood having those things.
So maybe if you said that provision of and access to public services. Is that what you're trying to say? Because are you trying to provide
Yes.
access?
Actually, that's a good improvement on that. Okay, how does that sound?
I mean, is that now my only question is that okay with a lawyer? Is it obvious that what we're trying to say?
Yes, that works.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comment on policy 1? Okay, going down to the implementation measures. The first is the town shall consider matters of community equity and environmental justice during the public project review process.
Is that the public? Is that so? The public project review process, does that happen one time? What is that per?
So that's when it's
or?
When a project's brought forth before the planning commission or the town council, then the public has the opportunity to comment on them. If it's a CEQA document related, then they can comment on the CEQA document. And
So should it be, so maybe, because the way that I'm reading that is during the public project, so it's like the only one. Should it maybe say during any public project review process? Does that mean the same thing?
to me, that means the same thing.
Okay.
Christy, I have a comment in the chat. What does community equity mean?
So again, community equity is that access for all members of the community to the town amenities, so parks, transit, programs, what have you.
And is that a glossary definition? Community equity?
No, that is not a glossary definition. I can add that to the glossary.
I think that would be good.
Okay, let me make a note.
And I have Michelle Reeves that would like to comment on that.
Sure.
I was the one who asked the question. I just wanted to weigh in. I think you have to be careful about the word equity is usually involved in like diversity, equity, and inclusion a lot. And so you just want to make sure you're not confusing equity of access with, so that just was confusing to me, like sort of throughout this document, how it's used. So I would just say kind of be careful about that or make sure that you're really defining that.
Sure. So we can clearly define that in the glossary, and hopefully that will address that, if any confusion on that.
Bonnie?
And so when I was reviewing the full document, and I know that tonight, we don't want to be changing any of the language for the other elements, but the one that kind of stood out in relation to this one is where it's park recreation and open space, and it's under implementation measure of 1.1.12. And standards that might allow some private amenities and new multiple family development to count towards parkland. I mean, is that one where then the public would have the opportunity to comment if, if a project is proposing that they will have private park space that will not be accessible to the public? I was a little confused by that.
In terms of counting that towards our park ratio?
Well, I guess in terms of this particular implementation measure and how to apply it. And so, again, like I said, in the park and rec and open space, they seem to be giving a little bit of ambiguity that maybe a developer could come in and propose private park space. And looking at it, I mean, I'm just assuming that means just for those residents, but then allowing the town to use that as parkland. But that seems to be in conflict with community equity.
Well, it would depend on whether or not there's a lack of any parkland elsewhere in the community. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to be able to access the same recreation site, but that they have some recreation site that they can access.
And yet the town would be allowed to count that for the town, but not all town residents can access it.
That's probably a bigger question for the Parks and Rec and their ratio.
Right. That's where, again, I know that we're not here to change the language, but that was the part that I thought was a little confusing.
Yeah, and that's something that, when we have the review of the document, that we can look at again. And if that should change, then the reference in the environmental justice element to that element, the Parks and Rec, would also be updated at that time.
Okay. And would this be something that this committee might recommend to the Parks and Rec committee about any particular language such as that one?
Yeah, if there's consensus among this committee that that's something that should be looked at more closely for that committee, then yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to agree with that. And if they're not done meeting yet, if they're still having committee meetings in the Parks and Rec, that sounds, as you were like I read through it and I was like, that's kind of weird. But now as you're describing it, it sounds an awful lot like separate but equal type of things. Like we all have access to parks, but these parks over here, as long as you have access to some parks, it's fine. But it doesn't sound equitable. It does not sound like it is environmentally just.
I guess it would depend on who's paying for that private park.
It does, but it's still something that I think that that I would agree with Bonnie in saying that it would be something that I would approve our committee of recommending to their committee to have another look at that in terms of environmental justice.
Okay.
I would say it's appropriate, if you want to do that, is make that motion right now, David, since this is the topic we're on, and have the committee take a vote on that. And Carol, did you just get what David said, or make him repeat it?
Can I rewind what I was saying?
Sure. I think so. Now would be the time to make a motion and then have.
All right. So I want to make sure that I got what the gist of what Bonnie was saying is that can you go to that implementation measure? Let's see. It was Parks and Rec 111.
1.2.
Okay, it's right here. I have it on the screen.
112. Okay.
The town will update the zoning code to consider different methods of achieving parkland for new development and may consider the following provisions that might allow an applicant, there's an extra period, to count additional parkland or open space toward the total acreage used to calculate allowed development in order to encourage, another one, additional parkland without loss of development potential. The relocation of development potential within a project to preserve additional land adjacent to or within riparian areas, oak woodland conservation areas, natural drainages that will allow extension of trails, and standards that might allow some private amenities and new multiple family development to count toward parkland.
These committee meetings, these type of committee meetings.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion that our committee would like the Parks and Rec committee to take a look at that Part C in implementation of measure PROS 1.1.2, Section C, and review that in terms of environmental justice and community equity.
I would say community equity development.
Community equity development?
Yep. If you're going to develop something, the whole community should have the opportunity to participate.
Equitable access, maybe?
There you go. Same concept.
Christy, I have Michelle Reeves with a comment.
Sure.
I just had another quick question actually in looking at that, because I kind of agree with you. I'm not a big fan of giving developers credit for providing park amenities if they're not available to a wider area. But Anders, maybe, I don't know who sat in that meeting, but it does say here for multiple family development. So do they mean multifamily, like sort of rental apartment housing, or do they mean any kind of development that's big enough to have multiple lots? What did they mean by multiple family development?
Multifamily it could be apartments, or it could be townhome, it could be for, a condo project, whatever. but
Higher
again,
density.
Okay,
higher
but they're not, so it could be a subdivision. They're not, because I could see where maybe you would do something like that as a way to try and encourage more park development in like a multifamily rental environment or something like that. But if it would count for a subdivision or something like that, that was just my question.
So are we looking for a second, or is that?
Yeah, we need a second.
I moved a second.
And then Carol, do you want to do a roll call? Or do you have it down?
If not, Carol can go back to the YouTube and listen to it completely.
Okay. Carol, you're muted.
Okay, here I am. I'm sorry. I was listening to the Parks meeting. I was kind of trying to find out where we were on the Parks meeting as to how this all plays into it. Some of what David said, I'm going to have to, honestly, I'm going to have to take off the meeting notes and get the actual wording of it, because it kind of morphed as we were going through it. So, oh, you're muted? I'm not muted now, am I?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. I'm sorry, I was listening.
What I wrote based on what David said was the environmental justice to the Parks Rec and Open Committee review this particular implementation measure of the Parks and Rec Committee 1.1.1.2 in terms of environmental justice and community equity development.
Now am I?
No.
So Carol, you're echoing.
What I wrote based on what David said was environmental justice.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mary Beth. So I think we had our first and a second, and now we'll do a roll call.
Carol, you'll need to unmute. Environmental justice and community equity.
We need a roll call, Carol.
Okay, I'm sorry. I can't hear anything that's happening. I'm hearing like three. I'm hearing
Mary Beth. So I think we had our.
Yeah, you've got something open that's making sound. Carol, you'll need to unmute. That's why I keep muting you.
Mary Beth, maybe you can do the roll call vote.
Sure.
You have the agenda handy with all the names.
I do. Okay, roll call vote for Carol.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have had 3 echoes of the entire meeting going for the last 5 minutes.
Ugh.
And so I have that David made a motion. David, I'm honestly going to have to get the motion. I'm going to listen to the meeting and get the actual wording of your motion. I did not even hear a second. So who do we have for a second?
Lorraine.
Okay. Sorry about that. Somehow along the line, I heard 3 echoes of the entire meeting going the whole time. So
we have 3 motions in 3 seconds then.
Yes, you did. And it was very interesting to listen to. I'm not going to lie. So we're going to go with a roll call vote. And we've got Jennifer Nicely.
Aye.
Bonnie London.
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood.
Aye.
David Ring.
Yes.
And Lorraine Theobald.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Christy, I think we can go forward.
Okay. We didn't do number 2 yet, right?
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. So the town shall modify the general plan, zoning code, and zoning map to maintain environmental justice within the town and achieve equitable conditions throughout the town.
This is one I actually had a question about. And so this one's, the way that it's worded is saying that it has to go back and modify the general plan. That's the way I'm reading it. And is that what you're trying to say? Like because we're kind of in that process right now.
Yes, we
And
are in
so-
the process. Yeah, and you're right. It's not something where we're doing that actively.
Right. And the way that it's saying is like, we've already, like, the way that I'm reading it is, we've already done it, and now we have to go back and change it. And we have to, because it says the town shall do this.
Yeah.
The town shall modify it. And so I'm wondering if there's a better way to say that we will continue to update the general plan. Maybe
Actually,
update it.
about maintain the general plan, zoning code, and zoning map to assure environmental justice within the town and achieve. Yeah, assure instead of maintain.
You want Ashore?
Are they the same thing?
Where's Jean?
Yeah.
that to me says it, that reads what I expected it to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. All right. And then this last one is something that I added from, you didn't see this originally. It's based on the comments that were received. The town shall continue to work with Placer County and local service organizations to ensure services that enhance health and well-being are available to enhance health. Oh, okay, hold on. Let me read this. I think I'm reading wrong. The town shall continue to work with Placer County and local service organizations to ensure services that enhance health and well-being are available to all members of the community, such as food access, cooling centers, emergency shelters, and disaster relief.
Christy, didn't we have this policy in the safety element? I know we spent a long time talking about that.
Probably not
Okay.
exactly like this, because this is based off of, it's actually Carolyn's comment.
Okay.
So I want to just, so you say ensure here and you say assure there, and I looked it up, and assure is not the same thing as ensure. And we really want to say ensure. We want ENSURE.
All right.
Both of them. Assure is like your, let me go back to what it said. Just because everybody now wants to know. It's like you're reassuring somebody, like you're giving confidence to somebody else. So that's not quite the same thing as what we mean to say. Yeah.
Yeah, not as strong. Okay, so does that sound appropriate?
I think so. That's kind of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the town is already working with the county to make sure everyone is taken care of. So that concludes the environmental justice original sort of policies and implementation measures. And then we go into supporting, and these are each of the other elements and their policies and implementation measures. Land use is still in a state of flux, so I did not go too far into updating this at all for land use, but the other elements that have gone through some committee and reached closure or near closure have been updated.
I have a quick question about all of these in one big thing.
Yeah.
So they're mentioned here, they're referenced here in the environmental justice SIG, pointing to all these other places. In the other places, are they mentioned that they're also in the environmental justice?
No.
So my question is, if they get changed, So if implementation measure PROS 1.1.1.1 gets changed somewhere else,
Mhm.
how do we know that this also needs to change?
So when we do any updates, and we're not talking about
Like
before.
in 15 years.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So down the road, general plan updates done, and we're implementing all of these great things. And then there's a change. What we need to do at that time is to make sure and check the environmental justice element, to make sure that it's updated here as well.
So is there,
David,
so what happens legally then if implementation
Legally, if
measure
it-
PROS 1.1.1 gets changed, but it doesn't get changed in the environmental justice setting?
If the one in the Parks and Recreation element is the one that will go to, that is the official policy. The other thing, David, anytime the general plan is updated, the staff has to go through and make sure it's consistent. But again, Parks and Recreation trumps anything in the environmental justice.
Because we're referencing, because we're stating this is a reference to that.
Right.
And so
These are
okay.
just references.
I as long as that's true, then I'm okay with it.
Carolyn? Oh, I'm sorry.
I would offer to cover the town, just put words to the effect of Christy in the beginning saying, please double check with the general plan specific element to make sure that you have the most current verbiage or whatever the proper word is. So you have something in this
Sure.
that just says, as you read through this, please double check to make sure that this is the most current. And it's just one more CYA for everybody involved based on the conversation we just had. Does that make sense, Christy?
Yeah. How about if I say something like this, are listed below by reference with the, what do I want to say?
Please refer to specific element for most current information.
Yes.
Like put it in a parentheses or something like that.
And Chris will have to do this in every element because every element has references.
Maybe for the current text or adopted text.
And please refer to the specific element for the adopted text, but something along those lines. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
just mention like these are not separate reference. These are not separate policies. These are only referenced policies. Yeah.
Right. Right. That's good catch.
And Bonnie, you had your hand up. Did that get resolved?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if the land use policies were from the general plan that's existing, just because I know that we're going to be meeting and we haven't wrapped up. So I just didn't know if these were the old existing ones that haven't been updated yet.
These are basically placeholders from old text that need to be updated once land use has gotten to some more solid conclusions.
Okay, thanks.
Does that mean we're not done until they're done? This committee?
Actually, you can adopt your goals, policies, and objectives because doing the referencing is purely exercise to go through and provide that reference, David.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think for a good planning commission in its consolidated form with all the right numbering and the ADA formatting, et cetera, then definitely take a look and make sure it's consistent.
So
Carolyn?
Me being the little OCD that I am. So I noticed on page 9-13, Christy, line 36, it just said EPA instead of Cal EPA. So once again, there's a big difference between Fed EPA and Cal EPA.
And let me check that because it might not be referencing Cal EPA if it's from a different element.
Okay,
so we said
9-13, page 9-13, line 36. It says compliance with EPA. I thought you meant Cal EPA because we're in California. Yes.
But this is the public health and safety element. So it's probably Cal EPA. Yeah.
I was on public health and safety. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure it's supposed to be Cal EPA.
Yeah, it should be Cal EPA. You're right.
Right. Thank you again.
Yep. And I will let Matthew know. Hang on 1 minute while I write this down. Okay, he can fix that on his end too. Thank you. Any other comments? Did everyone have a chance to look at some of the other elements and review those too?
I'm not.
Saw some heads nodding.
I have one other. It sounds like we're almost done, and it's to me. I mean, it depends on what we're going to do with this. But there's at the very beginning of this document, there's one sentence that was very confusing to me. It took me a while to get through, and I was just going to email it to you. And actually, there's a typo that I found too. And I was just going to email it to you, but I figured if we're gonna,
tell
it sounds like we're about ready to approve this document. I didn't want to approve it until So on line 6, that sentence that starts jurisdictions in which, that sentence to me took me so long to understand what you were trying to say. And so I think what you mean to say is, so there's jurisdictions in which a disproportionate burden of environmental risk is present, and for which that burden affects only certain populations. Because and that's even shorter. I just made that up, but that's even shorter than than the thing I was going to send you. But it was like, I swear, I was like, where does the preposition stop? And what are we trying to say here? And I couldn't, it just took me so long. But thank you. That right there actually fixes it.
No, thank you. That does make much more sense to the reader.
Okay. Yep, I agree with
and
that.
And then you said you had another one?
There was one typo on line 28 at the bottom of this page. It should say you have disadvantaged community, and it should be disadvantaged community.
Yes.
And that was all. It looked like later on there were a couple font sizes that weren't quite right, but I think you're going to fix that later. So I didn't want to say. But that was everything. That's all of my comments.
Good.
So
thank
I don't
you.
have to email it to you.
Great job. Is there anybody in the public, Mary Beth?
No, I had a comment in the chat from Stephanie Youngblood that says, looks good, 2 thumbs up.
All right. So if no one in the committee has any more and no more public comment, then Mary Beth, what do you want us to do at this point?
If the committee is satisfied with the document as it is, the correct method of proceeding would be a motion from the committee. I have some text that we can use, and that would be a motion recommending the Environmental Justice Element Committee forward to the Planning Commission our recommendation for goals, policies, objectives, and implementation measures for our committee's assignment as modified by today's meeting. This committee recognizes that this completes our task at this time and that we have an opportunity to participate in the environmental justice element review by the Planning Commission and Town Council of the draft 2020-2040 General Plan Update.
All right, so do we have a motion to say what Mary Beth just said?
So moved.
That was Lorraine.
Yep.
That was Lorraine.
And Stephanie seconded, I think.
Yes. Seconded. Okay.
Okay, and then we'll have a roll call, please.
Okay. Jennifer Knisely,
Yes.
Bonnie London,
Yes.
Stephanie Youngblood,
Yes.
David Ring,
Yes.
and Lorraine Theobald.
Yes.
Okay.
Yay. All right, then.
Excellent job, team.
Good job,
Thanks everyone
guys.
for all your participation. You did great.
So that I think that concludes this committee, and we have no more meetings.
Correct.
That is correct. This
Okay.
will be our last meeting.
And we adjourn.
But we do encourage all committee members to participate going forward in the general plan update. Make sure that we stick the landing going forward and that what we've done here continues throughout the general plan. So as the CEQA documents are created, this will go forward in a draft element, probably the end of this year for review, the first part of next year. And then back to the Planning Commission after that review period is over. Planning Commission will take their stab at it and their recommendation will proceed to the Town Council. So there's plenty of opportunity going forward to participate, not only in this element, but others. Go ahead, Bonnie.
And tomorrow night, Planning Commission will be meeting to discuss the housing elements recommendations for an inclusionary housing ordinance. And then I believe August 3rd, we will also be meeting to hopefully, review and adopt the housing elements. So again, there have issues that this committee would like to have some input and attend. So please come.
Yeah, the August 3rd Planning Commission meeting will take the recommendation from last week's meeting going forward. Planning Commission will make recommendation to the Town Council, which will be on August 17th for planning or for the Town Council adoption.
All right. Thank you so much. Do we need to do anything else?
Adjourn us.
Adjourn.
Thank you.
8:31. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.